At one point, Ferrari looked untouchable. Its cars were symbols of speed, prestige, and success. Its machines dominated racetracks, attracted some of the wealthiest customers in the world, and carried a reputation that seemed impossible to challenge. To many people, Ferrari was more than a car company. It was the benchmark by which every other sports car manufacturer was measured. But far from the racing circuits and exclusive events that surrounded the brand, one Italian businessman was becoming increasingly frustrated. He admired Ferrari. He bought its cars. He drove them regularly. And because he knew them so well, he also saw flaws that, in his view, should never have existed in vehicles that expensive or that celebrated. The problem wasn't money. The problem wasn't mechanical knowledge. The problem was that no one seemed interested in listening. That businessman was Ferruccio Lamborghini. By then, he had already built an impressive fortune. His companies were thriving, and his success allowed him to buy virtually any car he wanted. Yet the more Ferraris he owned, the more he became convinced that certain issues simply shouldn't exist. Believing he could help improve the product, he decided to bring his concerns directly to the man at the top. What happened next would become one of the most famous stories in automotive history. According to the account that has survived for decades, Ferruccio Lamborghini approached Enzo Ferrari to discuss the problems he had experienced with the company's cars. Instead of finding an open conversation, he was met with dismissal. The man behind Ferrari had little interest in taking advice from a tractor manufacturer. The meeting ended quickly, but its consequences would last for generations. For most people, it would have been nothing more than an unpleasant encounter, a disagreement between two successful businessmen, the kind of story that would be forgotten within days. But Ferruccio Lamborghini made a different decision. He would not try to convince Ferrari that it was wrong. He would build his own car. And not just any car, a car capable of challenging Ferrari on its own turf. What began as a personal insult soon became a battle of reputation, engineering, and ambition. On one side stood the most respected name in Italian performance cars. On the other stood a businessman who had never built a world-class sports car before. The question seemed obvious. How could someone with no legacy in that market hope to challenge a legend? The answer would create one of the greatest rivalries in automotive history, reshape the supercar industry, and turn two Italian brands into global symbols of power, speed, and status. This is the story of how a single insult sparked a billion-dollar rivalry that never truly ended. To understand why that conversation had such far-reaching consequences, you first have to understand the Italy that existed at the time. The country was in the middle of a rapid economic transformation. After the hardships of the post-war years, Italian industry was expanding, factories were growing, and a new generation of entrepreneurs was taking advantage of opportunities that had never existed before. The rebuilding of the country created enormous demand for machinery, infrastructure, and transportation. It was an environment where companies could emerge quickly, and in some cases, grow at an extraordinary pace. It was in that environment that Ferruccio Lamborghini built his fortune. While many people dreamed about sports cars, he was focused on something far more practical. His business revolved around agriculture, a critical sector in a country working to modernize its economy. His tractors gained popularity because they solved real problems. They were reliable, efficient, and highly valued by farmers looking to increase productivity. As the years passed, the company expanded, profits grew, and Ferruccio became one of Italy's most successful businessmen. His financial success gave him access to something few people could afford. He began buying some of the most desirable automobiles in Europe. Not because he needed them for business, but because he genuinely appreciated engineering, performance, and mechanical design. For someone who spent his days surrounded by engines, machinery, and industrial innovation, sports cars were more than status symbols. They were machines that could be studied, evaluated, and understood. At the time, few brands commanded as much admiration as Ferrari. The company had built an almost mythical reputation. Its cars represented speed, exclusivity, and prestige, Victories on the racetrack strengthened the brand's image, while its road cars allowed wealthy customers to own a piece of that world. Owning a Ferrari was a statement. It signaled success, wealth, and access to something reserved for a select few. But there was an important difference between Ferrari and most traditional automakers. Ferrari's identity was deeply rooted in motorsport. Much of the company's focus revolved around performance, competition, and the relentless pursuit of speed. Comfort, practicality, and certain aspects of the customer experience often came second. Many buyers accepted that trade-off without hesitation. After all, they were purchasing machines built by one of the most respected names in automotive history. Ferruccio Lamborghini saw things differently. He believed a high-performance car didn't have to force its owner to accept unnecessary compromises. In his view, power, comfort, reliability, and refinement could exist together. What bothered him was not simply the presence of specific flaws. What truly stood out to him was the sense that no one seemed interested in fixing them. At the same time, the sports car market contained an opportunity that few companies were fully addressing. There were wealthy customers who loved speed, but also wanted comfort for long-distance driving. People who didn't necessarily want a road-going race car. They wanted a sophisticated grand touring machine that could deliver performance without sacrificing usability. It was a space that existed between traditional luxury and pure racing heritage, and no company had completely claimed it. That was when an idea began to take shape in Ferruccio Lamborghini's mind. At first, it wasn't about defeating Ferrari. It wasn't about creating one of the greatest rivalries in automotive history. The idea was much simpler. If he believed sports cars could be better, then someone needed to build them. And if no one else was willing to do it, perhaps that responsibility would fall to him. What had started as frustration with a product was slowly becoming something much bigger. For the first time, Ferruccio Lamborghini was no longer thinking like a dissatisfied customer. He was beginning to think like a competitor. And that shift would lay the foundation for one of the most famous rivalries the automotive industry has ever seen. The decision to build his own car sounded unrealistic to many people. Ferruccio Lamborghini was a successful businessman, but his reputation came from industrial machinery, not high-performance automobiles. Ferrari had decades of experience, a legendary brand, and deep roots in motorsport. Challenging a company of that stature seemed like a losing battle from the start. Yet Ferruccio wasn't trying to prove that he could win races. His goal was different. He wanted to build a car that delivered exceptional performance without forcing drivers to accept compromises he believed were unnecessary. From the very beginning, his approach differed from Ferrari's. While many manufacturers focused on adapting racing technology for the road, Lamborghini concentrated on creating the ultimate grand touring car. The priority was to combine power, stability, comfort, and refinement in a single package. It was a strategy that didn't attempt to imitate Ferrari. Instead, it aimed to serve a group of customers who wanted something the market wasn't fully providing. To turn that vision into reality, Ferruccio made a decision that would define the company's early years. Rather than trying to do everything himself, he surrounded himself with talented engineers and experienced automotive specialists. The objective was simple: bring together people capable of transforming an ambitious idea into a world-class product. The company was still small, but it was rapidly accumulating something far more valuable than size: expertise. Its early cars attracted attention because they felt different. They weren't just fast machines. There was a clear focus on driver comfort, build quality, and overall balance. Gradually, wealthy enthusiasts began to notice that a new alternative was emerging from Italy, one that lacked Ferrari's history but wasn't constrained by it. The real breakthrough came when Lamborghini stopped playing it safe. Instead of competing quietly, the company began building cars that commanded attention before the engine was even started. Aggressive styling, bold proportions, and increasingly powerful engines turned the brand into something impossible to ignore. If Ferrari represented tradition and prestige, Lamborghini began to represent rebellion and audacity. That shift became undeniable with the arrival of one of the most important cars in the company's history. The Miura wasn't simply another product launch. For many automotive historians, it redefined what a supercar could be. Its design looked years ahead of its time. Its performance captured headlines around the world. Even standing still, it felt dramatic. More importantly, the Miura proved that Lamborghini was not a temporary experiment. The company had demonstrated an ability to innovate at a level few people thought possible. From that moment forward, Lamborghini began building something even more powerful than a lineup of successful cars. It was building an identity. Customers weren't simply buying an automobile, they were buying an alternative to the establishment represented by Ferrari. In a market where heritage often drove purchasing decisions, Lamborghini appealed to people who wanted something different. Something bolder, more provocative, less predictable. At the same time, the rivalry gained momentum. Even without constant public confrontations, comparisons between the two companies became unavoidable. Every new model sparked the same debate: Ferrari or Lamborghini? Which represented the future of Italian performance cars? Which delivered the more exciting experience? Which was setting the standard for the industry? Over the following years, Lamborghini continued strengthening its reputation through increasingly ambitious vehicles. Cars like the Countach transformed the company into a cultural phenomenon. Its radical design looked as if it had arrived from the future. Children put posters of it on their bedroom walls. Automotive magazines dedicated entire covers to it. Lamborghini was no longer just a car manufacturer, it had become a global symbol of aspiration. What made that achievement even more remarkable was that Lamborghini had accomplished it without Ferrari's racing legacy. The company was building its empire through a different strategy. Rather than relying primarily on trophies and track victories, it focused on design, innovation, exclusivity, and emotional impact. It was an alternative path to power within the automotive market. As time passed, the rivalry evolved into something bigger than the story that started it. It became part of the product itself. Every Lamborghini carried the spirit of a challenger unwilling to accept the existing hierarchy. Every launch reinforced the idea that two competing philosophies were fighting for the same customers. The result was extraordinary. What began as a response to a personal insult had become a globally recognized brand. Lamborghini was no longer simply the company founded by a dissatisfied customer. It had become a powerful force, admired by enthusiasts, collectors, and drivers around the world who wanted something beyond tradition. The rivalry had created a new powerhouse in the automotive industry. And just as it seemed that the rise would continue without limits, new challenges began to emerge. Challenges that even the success of Lamborghini's most iconic years would not be able to prevent. But building a legendary brand and keeping it strong for decades are two very different challenges. The same rivalry that helped fuel Lamborghini's rise also began to expose its weaknesses. As the company grew, the market around it was changing. What had once looked like a straightforward battle between two Italian sports car manufacturers was becoming something much larger. New competitors entered the scene. Economic downturns reshaped consumer behavior, and running a global luxury brand required far more than building extraordinary machines. During its years of rapid growth, Lamborghini thrived because of its unique identity. Its cars stood apart from everything else on the road. While many manufacturers pursued balance, Lamborghini often chose boldness. That strategy worked because the market valued exactly what the brand offered: exclusivity, personality, and an emotional experience that few competitors could replicate. But that same strategy also carried risks. The more the company depended on a specific niche of customers, the more vulnerable it became to economic shocks and changes in demand. Ferrari held an important advantage in this regard. Over the years, it had built a more stable foundation, supported by its motorsport heritage, an established customer base, and a highly disciplined corporate structure. Lamborghini continued to attract attention, but sustaining long-term growth proved more difficult. The company was admired around the world, yet it did not always have the financial resources necessary to withstand periods of instability. The first cracks appeared precisely when the brand seemed strongest. The success of its iconic models created the impression that the future was secure. Behind the scenes, however, operating a supercar company was incredibly expensive. Research, development, engineering, hand-built production, and constant innovation required enormous investment. At the same time, sales volumes remained relatively small compared to mainstream automakers. The challenge wasn't a lack of vision, the challenge was scale. Building some of the most desirable cars on the planet did not automatically mean building a business capable of surviving every economic cycle. When global markets slowed, luxury buyers often postponed major purchases. In an industry where each sale carried significant financial weight, even small shifts in demand could create serious consequences. During this period, Ferruccio Lamborghini also began stepping away from the company he had created. His gradual departure changed the organization's internal dynamics. The founder had been central to the brand's identity from the very beginning. His vision helped shape priorities, products, and strategy. Without his direct influence, the company faced the challenge of preserving its soul while navigating increasingly complex business realities. Meanwhile, the competitive landscape continued to evolve. Ferrari was not standing still. It continued refining its products, strengthening its reputation, and expanding its global influence. Other performance car manufacturers also began moving into the same territory. The market that once seemed relatively limited was becoming more crowded and more competitive with every passing year. Staying relevant required constant reinvention. It was within this environment that Lamborghini entered one of the most difficult periods in its history. The company experienced ownership changes, restructurings, and recurring financial uncertainty. Each transition promised stability, but each also raised new questions about the future. To many observers, it appeared that the momentum built during the company's early years was beginning to fade. What makes this period particularly interesting is that many of the decisions made at the time were completely understandable. In many cases, leadership was simply trying to protect the business under difficult circumstances. Reducing risk, controlling costs, or seeking outside investment were rational responses to real challenges. The problem was that every adjustment also placed pressure on the company's identity. How could Lamborghini preserve the boldness that defined it without compromising its ability to survive? That tension became the true turning point in the story. For years, Lamborghini had succeeded by positioning itself as an alternative to Ferrari. Now it faced a different challenge. It had to prove that it could survive as a lasting institution rather than simply a manufacturer of spectacular cars. At times, the future genuinely seemed uncertain. The brand remained famous, its cars remained desirable, its name still carried enormous weight. But reputation and financial stability are not always the same thing. There was a growing risk that Lamborghini could become a legendary name remembered for its past, rather than a company capable of competing in an increasingly global and professionalized industry. While Ferrari continued strengthening its position as one of the most valuable automotive brands in the world, Lamborghini was fighting to redefine its place in the market. The rivalry that began with an insult was no longer just a clash of personalities or philosophies. It had become a battle for survival, and at that moment, the company approached one of the most important decisions in its history. Because the greatest threat facing Lamborghini was not losing to Ferrari. The greatest threat was disappearing before it ever had the chance to continue the fight. The story could have ended there. Many admired brands have disappeared precisely when they seemed too big to fail. Lamborghini had global recognition, iconic products, and a reputation built over decades. But none of those advantages guaranteed long-term stability. More than once, the company found itself facing an uncomfortable reality. Passion does not pay the bills, prestige does not fund innovation, and even a legendary brand can disappear if it lacks the structure needed to survive. It was during this period that Lamborghini underwent a transformation that would ultimately redefine its future. After years of uncertainty, ownership changes, and financial struggles, the company finally gained something it had lacked for much of its history: access to capital, industrial scale, and strategic stability. Becoming part of a much larger automotive group completely changed the equation. For the first time, Lamborghini could continue being Lamborghini without carrying every risk on its own. The impact was profound. The company did not abandon its identity. If anything, it doubled down on it. Its cars remained aggressive, dramatic, and emotionally charged. But now there was a stronger foundation behind the brand. Resources could be invested into technology, engineering, product development, quality improvements, and global expansion. What had once been an admired but vulnerable company was becoming something much more resilient. At the same time, the supercar market itself was evolving. New competitors entered the space. Technology advanced rapidly. Environmental regulations became more demanding. Customers no longer wanted only speed. They expected reliability, advanced engineering, modern features, and increasingly sophisticated ownership experiences. Many manufacturers struggled to keep pace with these changes. Some lost relevance, others disappeared entirely. Only a handful managed to preserve their identity while adapting to a new era. Ferrari continued to grow as well. Its position as one of the most prestigious automotive brands in the world remained largely intact. In many ways, the rivalry never produced a clear winner. Because the real outcome was not one company defeating the other. It was the creation of two different paths to greatness. Ferrari continued to represent heritage, racing pedigree, and decades of accumulated excellence. Lamborghini became the symbol of boldness, disruption, and the willingness to challenge convention. Rather than destroying one another, the two companies ultimately strengthened each other's identities. Every new Ferrari increased the pressure on Lamborghini. Every new Lamborghini pushed Ferrari to raise the bar. The rivalry elevated the entire industry. Perhaps the most fascinating part of this story is that it was never really about cars. At its core, it is a story about competition. It is a story about refusing to accept limitations imposed by someone else. When Ferruccio Lamborghini decided to enter a market dominated by a legend, the odds were overwhelmingly against him. He did not have Ferrari's history. He did not have Ferrari's reputation. He did not have Ferrari's legacy. What he had was something that has changed industries throughout history: the belief that there was a better way. Over the years, Lamborghini lost some of the independence that defined its earliest days. It endured financial crises, ownership changes, and periods of serious uncertainty. But it also gained something equally important: the ability to survive. And in highly competitive markets, survival is often the difference between becoming a forgotten chapter and becoming an institution. Today, millions of people recognize the names Ferrari and Lamborghini. Many know the cars, some know the rivalry. But few realize that this entire story began with a conversation that went terribly wrong. What seemed like a small moment ultimately triggered decades of competition, innovation, and transformation. Because empires are rarely built by opportunity alone. More often, they are built through conflict, through ambition, through people who refuse to accept the place they have been given. And the story of Ferrari and Lamborghini is a reminder that power is never permanent. The market can change, technology can change, consumer preferences can change. And when they do, even the strongest companies can find themselves vulnerable. What looks untouchable today may be challenged tomorrow. What seems impossible can become inevitable. And in every industry, the future belongs not to those who dominate the present, but to those who continue adapting when the world changes around them. If you want more stories about the rise and fall of the companies, rivalries, and business empires that shaped our world, subscribe to Inside Tech Empires.